What up, Wizards? It's Dev. More exciting stuff today. It's been a big week for Magic. Coming out of Magicon Chicago, we got the Pro Tour going on right now. More on that in tomorrow's video, but they've already used this weekend as an opportunity to show off some Final Fantasy cards. That was pretty awesome, but yesterday we got to see some brand new cards from Tarkir Dragonstorm, and I think this is the one that we've all been waiting for. Now, I word that the way that I do because I've made no bones about the fact that I thought Ether Drift was fun and cool, and also I'm really excited about the Final Fantasy set, but those things are not necessarily for everyone, whereas Tarkir, well, finally, we go back to a set with Magic the Gathering themes that's set on a Magic the Gathering plane that a lot of us have a deep affection for. So I think a lot of people are excited for this one, more of the community than has been excited for the last few sets. So with that in mind, let's take a look at some of these brand new standard legal cards from the next Magic the Gathering set. Let's look at Tarkir Dragonstorm stuff. And we'll start with one with kind of off the charts levels of nostalgia, especially for an uncommon. And it's the only uncommon that we saw in this whole batch of cards, but it's pretty ridiculous. So with that said, let's take a look at Skirmish Rhino right here. This is 3 mana. Abzan colors, that's a white, a black, and a green for a 3/4 Rhino with trample. When it enters, each opponent loses 2 life, you gain 2 life. Now, this is not our guy, right? But it obviously is his child. Just a little baby rhino that I actually like a good bit the more I think about him. This is obviously great in the limited environment. It might be decent ported over to a standard mid-range deck, but obviously there's some issues with that. Is this good enough in the 3-drop slot when compared to some of the other things you could play? Abzan mid-range could play Glissa Sunslayer and Preacher of the Schism in this slot. So is this really the best thing we could be doing? Well, I think in a world where like Gruul or Boros aggro is an amazing deck, and I'm pretty sure it's going to put like 3 copies in the top 8 or something of the Pro Tour this season. We'll see what ends up happening, but it is obviously a great deck. There's all flavors of mono red right now, and this does a pretty good job of brick walling them. That was one of the best things about Siege Rhino back in the day is, you know, in its standard, we had Monastery Swiftspear decks too. So it was really good against those decks, gaining you some life, having a high toughness and a relatively beefy power too, to again, kind of speed bump those aggro decks, keep them in check. And I think this does the same thing, just a turn earlier, and that's really good. Doesn't gain you quite as much life as its big brother, but the life loss is often negligible when you're trying to catch up to aggro, and you just want something with a decent toughness. This doesn't die to Torch the Tower, doesn't die to lightning strike effects and stuff like that. And if you're playing against black decks, it doesn't die to the majority of their removal outside of Go for the Throat, right? It doesn't die to Virtual Persistence or Nowhere to Run or Cut Down. So I don't want to make the same mistake a lot of people made with the first iteration of Rhino and be like, this looks like an okay card, and it's just the best card in Standard. And I don't think that this is going to be that, but I do think it's a little bit better than it looks when you line it up with certain aggro matchups. Let's go ahead and move on to the rares. Like I said, there's only like 1 uncommon today, so the rest of the cards are rares and mythics from this 10-card batch, and a lot of them are pretty hyped for like different reasons, right? But that said, there's got to be a first rare of the day, and this time it's an Orzhov enchantment. You might think I would cut that a little bit of slack, considering who I am and how much I like Orzhov. In case you didn't know me, first time seeing me, I like Orzhov. I say it in basically every video because I manufacture a reason to do so. But either way, that said, I like Baron Step Siege. Right? I like it. It's an Orzhov enchantment. I've already established that, but at the same time, I'm not sure how great it actually is. We'll take a look at it. It's 4 mana, 2 a white and a black for an enchantment. As it enters, choose Abzan or Mardu. If you chose Abzan, at the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. If you chose Mardu, at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died under your control this turn, each opponent sacrifices a creature of their choice. Now, individually, I'm not sure this card really does enough. Like, it can kind of anthem your team a little bit when it comes into play, or at least the turn it comes into play. Kind of sucks that it won't hit by your combat step, but still, you know, +1/+1 counters every turn can be really good. But obviously, as a aristocrats guy, you know, I'm into this Mardu mode, but even that, I'm not like convinced is quite enough. But in a Mardu deck, right, you could be playing, say, Immersturm Predator or Bortolomeo Presidio or some other sacrifice outlet, and this becomes a little bit better depending on how wide your opponent is going. But if your opponent's just playing like a normal mid-range deck or a deck with a couple of creatures in play at a time, this mode could be potentially really good, but even then I'm kind of worried that it costs a little bit too much. But I will say that it never does nothing when it comes into play unless you just have no creatures or a way to get rid of them. There's obviously setups where you can play this on turn 4, sacrifice a creature or lose 1 in combat, and then punish your opponent for that. So I do like that it does something the turn it comes down, around. And in Commander, I think that if you choose Mardu, you're going to get a decent amount of value turn over turn because it's an each opponent effect. But in Standard, I just think we probably have better for mana plays, especially if Aristocrats even wants to play 4-drops beyond Raise the Past. I think it's got way better options. Do like, though, that Sieges are back. Just getting off this particular card for a second, the concept of Sieges is always really cool to me. These tend to be decent Commander cards, depending on the design and all that, too. But occasionally, they see a little bit of play in Standard here and there, or at least historically they did when the set first came out. So I'd like to see kind of what the design of the rest of these are. I'm a little jacked about that, but I'll move on to another card here, another Mardu card. This one, Inevitable Defeat. This is 4 mana, 1 a red, a white, and a black, so Mardu colors. For an instant that cannot be countered, exile target non-land permanent. Its controller loses 3 life, and you gain 3 life. There's really only one negative to this, and it's that it costs 4 mana. And it's kind of tough to cast, too, a little bit, but I really like spells like this. It's kind of like an Utter End, but it's also a little bit like an Unlicensed Disintegration, or, something like that hits, for damage, right? But in this case, it's not just damage, it's a drain, and I think that's kind of important. If you are having to wait until turn 4 to cast this, you really don't want that to be the case with your removal spells. At least it's kind of gaining you back some of the life that tempo is losing you, theoretically, so I kind of like that about it. I don't want to have to use this against an aggro creature on turn 4, but I guess if I do, I get a little bit of life back. Either way, this is another one where the life loss may be negligible, but if you're playing the right kind of deck, you can stack up these life loss effects pretty nicely. I like that if you are playing sort of a Mardu burn deck, right? This is like a thing that exiles anything you wanted to exile. Which I think is really important just in and of itself, but also, again, contributes to your burn plan, and I like stuff like that. I like the fact that it's non-land permanent. I'm just bringing this up again. It hits literally anything non-land on the table, and it's an exile effect. So they did juice up, the actual removal spell aspect of this as much as they possibly could without it casting, the casting cost being exactly Crackling Doom and invalidating a bunch of Mardu removal spells before it. So I like it. I like the instant speed, and I honestly think the can't be countered part is going to be more relevant than you think. So there's a lot of good things about the card, but is it worth, at the end of the day, 4 whole mana? How many copies do you play? 1 or 2 usually in your Mardu deck. Is Mardu even a deck? You know what I mean? There's a lot of questions to answer before we actually end up slotting copies of this card into our deck, but it is undoubtedly a pretty decent removal spell just on text box alone. But let's move on to Narset Jeskai Waymaster here. This is 3 mana Jeskai colors. You see how that works. It's a blue, a red, and a white for a 3/4 legendary human monk. At the beginning of your end step, you may discard your hand. Your entire hand. If you do, draw cards equal to the number of spells you've cast this turn. So I guess if she's somehow your final card in your hand on turn 3, right, then you can discard nothing and draw 1. Let's go. You cast a spell. But just like some other Narsets, I think it's probably best to play this when you have open mana and then play another spell or 2, try to empty your hand as much as possible, draw 2 or 3, right? So she's actually kind of neat in a Standard context, but I don't think she quite makes the grade. She's one of those that if she sticks around for a turn or 2, you can get real value off of her. I think she's decent, but again, I'm just not sure she's quite there in Standard, especially considering what colors you're playing here. We'll end up seeing there's definitely some Monument to Endurance tricks and Marauding Mako tricks I think you can do with this. This is obviously best friends with a few cards we just got from Ether Drift, but is that going to be strong enough? I'm not super convinced. I mean, the reason I put this above the Mardu removal spell that looks kind of neat is that I think this is just a really good commander. It's the first card we've seen so far, at least in this batch, that you can put in your command zone, and I think that counts for something. It's a really, really cool card in that aspect, at least, right? I got to give it some points for that. But despite being a fun commander brew around, I'm mostly here to talk about Standard and stuff. I'm just not sure, again, this card really gets there, but I kind of want to play with it and see. Now, a card that a lot of people are going both goo-goo and also gaga at the same time over today is Stormscale Scion. This is 6 mana, 4 and 2 red for a 4/4 dragon with flying. Other dragons you control get +1/+1. But this thing also has Storm. Now, this card costs 6 mana. I guess that's my main argument against it. I've already talked about cards that cost, 4 mana being a little bit too expensive. Now, I will argue for a card that costs 5 mana in just a second. So I'll say, I feel like if you have enough of an effect on a game, then obviously you're a decent Magic card. But I think that setting this up up is going to be really, really difficult, considering it costs a lot of mana, but it also wants you to have cast at least like one, if not three or so other spells before it on the same turn. You can't like reanimate this or do anything wacky with it. I guess in like an Omniscience build, this could be like a win condition, but I feel like that deck already has win conditions, and I'm not sure it wants to go this far to get more, you know? So I'm not super convinced, man. Again, we get to the commander environment, you can do some pretty like wild stuff with a card like this. And I'm not going to go into all that because, again, even though I'll mention commander playability from time to time, in this particular like standard legal preview cards where a lot of people are hyped to like play the set in standard, I'm not going to go into commander too much, but I think it's pretty obvious to see why people are a little hyped in that format, especially with Dragons decks being as much of a thing as they are. You know, like two of the top most popular commanders are Dragon commanders. On EDH Rec for the last like 3 years. So that said, we'll get to a couple of cards that are way better for dragons, I think, even than this, considering again the casting cost on this bad boy. It's just not really there. In standard, I think the best chance you have of breaking this is probably like plotting stuff a couple of turns before and then playing it hopefully on an early turn with some ramp or something, right? But I'm not entirely sure how you're getting there, you know? But if you can play this and, you know, before that, I guess play like 3 things that you plotted, and maybe if you have some ramp, you play some other 1 mana spell or something. You get like 4 dragons, you give them all haste, you know, but like, you see how many hoops I'm jumping through here in the Magical Christmas Land example? I'm just not sure it's going to happen in competitive environments, but you know, Mind's Desire looks like a pretty bad Magic card when you first look at it. Oh, it costs way too much mana, man. But it's, you know, it's like restricted in Vintage or something like that. I guess the last thing I'll say is that if the card is actually dangerous in a competitive environment, I imagine it's better the farther back you go, right? Like, you know, formats like Legacy and Vintage that have access to a lot more free spells and cantrip effects and like free mana and stuff, and like even big mana like Dark Rituals and Seething Songs and whatnot. Like, you know, formats that actually can use those cards, I think, can probably leverage this card much better. So if it actually sees any play in a competitive environment, it kind of wouldn't surprise me if it was Vintage or something. But again, we'll have to wait and see about that. As far as standard goes, there's going to have to really be some tricks you can employ to get this thing to pop off, and I just don't know that we have access to those tricks yet. But let's look at Smile at Death next. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 white for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, return up to 2 target creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Put a +1/+1 counter on each of those creatures. Yes, I am looking at this after looking at the Stormscale dragon thing. I didn't even note how Stormscale's in his name, and that's actually a really funny, cute little inside joke because we talk about the Stormscale and how powerful a Storm card is or how good Storm can be in a particular format before it's broken and blah. It's a whole thing. I should have brought that up. But yeah, I think this card is at least more exciting to me than a card like Stormscale Dragon, because I'm just not sure how good that card's going to be in Standard. I don't know how good this card's going to be in Standard either, because it's kind of a Sigardian Savior that doesn't do the thing when it enters the battlefield, and you have to wait like an entire turn, right? And Sigardian Savior saw exactly 0 play in Standard. So I'm not sure how good this is really going to be, but it does work turn over turn, which I actually think can put the opponent in a pretty bad situation, man. Like if they kill your guys, just come back anyway. You know, it doesn't put finality counters on the creatures that it brings back. In an Aristocrats build, this is probably a little bit too expensive. I'll acknowledge that, but it does give you that sort of late game grindage that Aristocrats sometimes needs. You know, Aristocrats either OTK oriented, like I'm going to kill you all at once in 1 turn on 4 or 5, or I'm going to grind you out. The old school Aristocrats decks kind of took that philosophy, and this could be okay in those builds, but again, 5 mana is probably right out. But again, I'll say it, we get to a format like Commander, and I'm much more excited by this, especially in like my Aristocrats builds. You know, I'm not sure this makes it into LSO core or anything, but I want to at least give it tryouts. We'll see if it gets a jersey. You know what I mean? Like this, again, this kind of turn over turn value can be really good in a format like that, where you have, you know, 7, 8, 9 turns or whatever in most cases to make something happen. So really like it, dude. Again, it not putting finality counters on the creatures is something that I think I need to reiterate because it's probably the best and sneakiest part of the card. So really kind of like this. Probably going to try to get some work in with it. Also, dig the Alesha reference, man. We should do more of this where we turn like a legendary creature's title into a card. I think that's actually a really cool idea. We should do that all the time. But I'll move on now to a rare. Last couple of cards we've looked at are mythics, but a card that I think is going to be really good in my format at least is Sarkhan Dragon Ascendant. 2 mana, it's 1 and a red for a 2/2 legendary human druid. When it enters, you may behold a dragon. If you do, create a treasure token. So how do you behold a dragon? It's basically what it sounds like. So you can either point to a dragon that you already control and be like, look at that guy, or you can reveal a dragon from your hand. Behold this dragon in my hand. So you can do it 2 ways, and it's pretty easy to do. You don't even have to have a dragon out to behold a dragon. It's just whatever you want to curve Sarkhan into usually, right? So you get a treasure token. Most times this guy comes into play on curve. Shouldn't be too hard to do. But also, whenever a dragon you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on Sarkhan. Till end of turn, he becomes a dragon in addition to its other types, and also gains flying. Gross. So on turn 3, it's pretty easy to play a 4/4 dragon, like a 4-drop dragon at least, and also have a 3/3 flying attacker. It's not, and like the next turn you can do it again, have like a 4/4 flying attacker because you played another dragon. That's really nasty. It's also not once a turn. So if you succeed in playing more than 1 dragon in a turn, or they enter the battlefield, you don't even have to cast them. Somehow more dragons than 1 enter the battlefield on your turn, then he's going to get extra +1/+1 counters. And that's really sick, dude. So I don't know, man. We're kind of looking at a 2 mana 3/3 that ramps and flies. Like, what else do you need out of a Magic card? That's going to be really decent for Standard in specifically Dragons decks, which I'm just not sure are going to be really good. But hey, we got some Changelings in Standard. We got the Roaming Throne to be like a 4-drop dragon that's halfway decent. And soon we'll go back to Lorwyn. Like next year we'll go back to Lorwyn. That's going to have Changelings in it, which count as dragons. If I wasn't clear on that earlier, But we've also got some decent dragons. There were some 3-drop dragons introduced in Foundations that you can curve into this without having to use the treasure token. But, using the treasure token, getting a 4-drop dragon, whether your Sarkhan is still alive or not, they can cut down your Sarkhan all they want to. You still get the treasure token off of it. And so getting a 4-drop dragon on 3 is actually a pretty big deal too. Just there's a lot of things I like about this little card, man. I had played stuff like Magda in my Dragons decks before to help get some turn 2 potential ramp. And this is turn 2 nearly guaranteed ramp. That unlike, say, a Rivaz of the Claw in the 3-drop slot, if they kill it, it still leaves behind that ramp. So just really like the design on this. I'm not sure that it makes Dragons playable, but Dragons always needs, playable cards lower on the curve. They've got all these ridiculous 4 and 5 drops, even 6 drops if you want them most of the time, but they never have like good 2 drops. I think they need those as much as possible, and this is a really good one. But the next to last card we'll look at today is a 5-drop in jeskai that I've seen some discussion over. I've got some friends in this argument. Saffron Olive has said this card looks really, really good to him. And I agree, despite all the people who are like, no. But I think Shiko, Paragon of the Way, is actually a really good Magic card. This is 2, a blue, a red, and a white for a 4/5 legendary spirit dragon with flying and vigilance. When it enters, exile target non-land card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard. Copy it, then you may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. So this is like the best Sarah Angel I've ever seen. Extra point of toughness, still keeps the flying and vigilance, and has a ridiculous, and I mean absolutely ridiculous, enter the battlefield trigger. This is very, very good, man. You just get whatever 3-drop non-land you want from your yard. And just cast it. You have to, I guess you have to exile the thing and then cast a copy or whatever. So you're not going to be able to hit the same thing multiple times. That kind of sucks or whatever. But I still think this is really, really fantastic, man. Like you can hit a temporary lockdown with this and shut them down on the other side of the table if that's what you want to do, especially if they succeeded in breaking one of your lockdowns, right? Just get it back. That seems nice. But even outside of tricks like that, there's obviously plenty of things you can grab with this, enchantments, artifacts, vehicles, and stuff like that, all included. But obviously you're mostly looking to hit creatures and stuff with this, but I don't even know how true that is half the time, man. You can hit like a Caretaker's Talent with this. You can hit an Urabrass Forge with this, and this is all in the colors of this card. So I don't know, dude. I think that there's plenty of things that you want to bring back with this. And even if you have to, play cards that let you filter and discard cards into your yard for getting out later with this, or maybe there's some sort of combo that allows you to bring something back from your yard, create a copy of this guy to, do it all over again or something. All I'm saying, it has some combo potential, but mostly just for the value that it immediately gets you. I really like it, man. You get a 4/5 flying vigilance and a 3-drop, like how much value do you need for 5 mana? I think there's a lot of potential just in Standard on this. But again, you get to a format like Commander and you just got this in the command zone. I think it's great, That's all I really want to say about it in Commander. This looks like a fun one to brew around too. But, back to Standard, this can go in the same decks that like Sarah Paragon goes into for just redundancy and a big attacker. So don't underestimate the vigilance either. That's tends to be very important. So it's kind of like everything about this except for the casting cost. But I can get over it. Again, you give me enough value, I can get over it. And I think this does. Now, before we get to the final Standard legal card of the day, we're going to stop off and look at the only Commander product card that we got. Sorry if you want to scrub through this one, but I'm actually kind of interested in this as a commander. It's Teval, the Balanced Scale. This is 4 mana, 1 in Sultai colors, so a black, a green, and a blue. For a 4/4 legendary spirit dragon, with flying, whenever Teval attacks, mill 3 cards. Then you may return a land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Whenever 1 or more cards leave your graveyard, create a 2/2 black zombie druid creature token. So you have a 4/4 flyer that mills for you and ramps for you, and whenever it ramps, you get a 2/2. That's pretty cool. It's not restricted to once each turn, and it's just leave your graveyard. So that works on reanimation, or if something gets exiled from your graveyard, or if something comes from your graveyard to your hand, or to the top of your library. Leave your graveyard is an extremely vague trigger that works really nicely for what this deck is trying to do. I actually think you could put a real army of dudes onto the table the turn this comes out if you're doing things correctly. So kind of a huge fan of this in your command zone, but I think it could have been safe to print in Standard. I'm a little surprised they didn't, but all that aside, again, this is a pretty exciting commander in a color combination I really like that can really flex to do the things the commander is trying to do. So big fan of it. But we have made it to the final card of the day. It is in fact Standard legal somehow, and it is Mox Jasper here. This is 0 mana for a legendary artifact. You can tap it and add 1 mana of any color. You can only activate this though if you control a dragon. Now, I feel like I once again need to bring up that we have changelings in Standard. We actually have a 2-drop changeling in Standard. So you can go, Mox Jasper on 1, 2-drop changeling on 2, and have a mana open with your Jasper to now cast another spell or something. So that's a cute line, but we go back to Lorwyn. Again, I'll bring it up. We go back to Lorwyn next year. We get a bunch of changelings. We might even have 1-drop changelings, which would be wild if we were able to actually use them. I believe, have some 1-drop changelings right now, like Changeling Outcast, for instance. That would work really well in other formats with a Mox Jasper. So very cute tricks there. And if we have 1-drop dragons, then obviously that's insane. That in Standard, at least, if we have 1-drop dragons, then that is insane with Mox Jasper. So be on the lookout the whole rest of this set reveal for 1-drop dragons or 2-drop dragons, because they're all going to make this card pop off like crazy. I can't wait to see the lines. And this is, again, just in Standard, where you go Jasper on some early turn, but you can go Sarkhan that we just looked at on turn 2 into Dragon on turn 3. Drop your Jasper if you haven't yet, and now you've got a mana to torch the tower or something. There's serious lines involved with this card that I think are great just in Standard alone, but obviously the more you open up, to more card choices and Pioneer, Explorer, Modern even, then you've got some real choices to make this card go crazy. So I'm not going to say that it's going to be as Standard playable or anything as I thought Mox Amber was going to be, and that card never popped off. But hey, if you look at Mox Amber nowadays, it's pretty expensive to buy. That's because it's a ridiculous commander card, and that's where this card really shines too. I'll say it again, said it earlier to kind of set it up for now. That's called foreshadowing. It's a literary device where 2 of the most popular commanders on EDH for the last 3 years or more have been dragon commanders, like the Dragon and all that. And usually those decks are 5 colors, right? And those decks can control a dragon relatively quickly. So this just goes in every Commander Dragons deck forever. Even if you're not playing 5-color dragons or anything like that, I still think it goes into your mono red dragons deck with Lathlis or something like that as your commander. I still think it goes definitely. Why would you not play the card? And dragons are maybe the most popular creature type, aside from perhaps elves or goblins even, to play in commander. So smart move, I guess, by Wizards of the Coast here. they know what creature types commander players love and just what creature types players love in general. This is a Mox that works for dragons. And I think that even if you're not a hardcore commander player, if you're just a casual Magic player, you're going to love the idea of this card because most players are into dragons, you know. So hitting that Game of Thrones crossover market really nicely. So maybe we will get that Game of Thrones Universes Beyond. It wouldn't surprise me. But one way or the other, ridiculous looking Magic card in potentially multiple formats, but if nothing else, this is going to be the chase rare of the set, chase mythic of the set, because of its commander playability, right? But I do still think, you know, there's a reason I went on for a couple of minutes there about standard, because I do think this has real lines that work. Now, that is all 10 cards that we got to see for this little sneak peek, but we are actually pretty close to preview season. We're not officially in it yet or anything like that, but within a month or so's time, we will be in real preview season for this set. And I know perpetual preview season and all that, there's a discussion to be had, but I can't wait for these previews, and I can't wait for more Final Fantasy previews, but these are going to be, you know, again, actual Magic IP returning to a plane that we all, for the most part, really, really like, and a concept that we really like too. You know, not only do we get to see more Tarkir stuff, like all the clans, right? We got to see Mardu and Abzan cards and stuff like that today. That's always cool. People really like those themes, but, you know, we also got to see a bunch of dragon stuff, and we tend to, again, it's not just commander and casual players. I think a lot of us like dragons, myself included, so pretty appetizing preview for this set, and I really can't wait to sink our teeth into more. But now it is your turn. Just let me know how you felt about all these today, what you're going to do with them. You know, can't wait for more of this set. Let me know. I know Ether Drift again was not for everyone. I felt like this set was almost like personally for me and almost me alone, but there actually are dozens of us. I was impassioned enough to do a whole defense of Ether Drift that some people watched and liked. But anyway, Ether Drift was for me and a couple of other people out there. But again, Tarkir, I feel like, is one that a lot of the community is going to come together and really enjoy, because we get a Magic the Gathering set. Can you imagine? Right? So, you know, I know a lot of people are excited about this one. Count me among them as well. So let me know how you felt about the whole batch of cards, and again, what you plan on doing with these and what you want to see from this set as well, because there's a lot to talk about. But anyway, that's all I got for this one. Just do all the YouTube stuff on your way out. Hit the button shaped like a thumb. Sub to the channel if you haven't yet. Trying to get to 150K. We can get there together, I promise you, hand in hand. Apart from that, you can check out the Patreon. It's just $1 a month to vote on content around here. We're doing deck techs. I promise we'll get to this Katrama's deck tech, but they keep doing previews for new sets, and now I got to cover the Pro Tour tomorrow when that wraps up, so we'll get to it early next week. I promise we will do the Katrama's deck tech, but after we do that one, there will be more Patreon polls, so if you want to be a part of those, $1 a month, I'll leave a link in the description. Or if you just want to help out around here, you can leave a tip in the comments. That's fine too. I've been living off those for a couple of months, and I really appreciate y'all. But in any case, I think I'm actually donezo for this one, so I'll turn it over to you. Let me know how you felt about the whole thing. I'm jacked. It's pretty obvious that I'm jacked for all these sets coming up. But anyway, I'm done, guys. I'm done from the place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.